Welcome to the 11th episode of L&D Go Beyond podcast, where we are collecting workplace learning insights from leading experts so that you can benefit from them. If you've been enjoying the series, I recommend subscribing to the channel. Today, we have Maria Leggett with us, and we are going to talk about AI and upskilling imperative for L&D. Maria is Director of Education, Talent and Change at MHI. She has been driving learning, talent development, and organizational change management for 15 years. As a leader, innovator, and catalyst for change, she has steered Fortune 500 corporations and mid-sized firms to new performance levels with a highly trained workforce as a competitive advantage. As executive faculty for MHI's professional development programs, Maria coaches and facilitates executive workshops and leadership cohorts for MHI's 800 plus global member companies. Before MHI, Maria was leading talent and learning at Times Warner Cable, CTE, and Texton. A lifelong learner, she has a master's degree in instructional design and is a certified coach. Maria holds PMP, SHRMSCP, ProfSci, CSM, and Scaled Agile SAFE SPC certifications. Outside of work, she can be found hiking up mountains, skiing down them, or spending time with her family. Oh, it's so wonderful to have you with us on the podcast, Maria. Very welcome.
Thank you for having me. Exciting to talk about all the things that are happening with learning development and AI.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. You've had such a, illustrious career. I'm so excited to understand from you about what are the changes that are coming in the world, specifically regarding to AI, and how does it really impact L&D? So how do you see AI impacting learning and development, if that's a good place to start?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing that is important to think about AI with L&D is the scalability of programs and skill mastery will be completely changed, reinvented. And I'm going to tell a little story, give away like the years I've been in my career, but 20 years ago, when I would do a learning project, you would go out and you talk to people, you'd try to get data. There was very little out there. You were just scrambling to get pieces together. You try to pull together that training. Someone would say, well, you didn't talk to this person, or you didn't get this perspective. And so you were constantly revising. You never knew if you had a complete picture. And that's going to change with AI because we're going to have access to so much data to allow us to have a bigger picture of what the skill set is for employees and what are the capabilities. So an example is that, it's happening right now as I talk to people about Grammarly. So Grammarly is a software program that will correct your writing and your grammar when you're typing in Word or an email, but in the background, it's doing AI and machine learning. So it's helping you improve your writing skills without someone helping you or taking a class. The next stage of that is that Grammarly is going to probably open up that data to learning and development teams so that they can see the progress people are having with their writing and their communication skills. And they can look at that for, say, a contact center and say, we really need to improve the writing, the efficiency, being more succinct when you're talking to our customers. Here's some interventions that we can do. Or it may be the tone, because it's also tracking tone. So we need to think about how we respond to our employees, how we respond to our customers. Are we empathetic and compassionate? So it's going to have all that data. And to me, that is incredible to have access to that data. So it's making those personalized recommendations. This week, I got a message from Office 365 that I've been working too much, because Office 365 is tracking how long I'm on my computer, how long I'm spending on things. It tracked that I had been working past midnight. So it's going to give recommendations like that. And again, if I'm in L&D and I'm getting access to that data, I'm going to be looking at what is the root cause here. Well, are people overworked? Are managers not delegating? Is there a culture change? Is there people aren't prioritizing their projects? I mean, there's so much that can come out of that by having that bigger, expansive snapshot of data. And then I think also with that is that you're getting this bigger picture of employee learning that provides personalized data. So I'm knowing beyond, how many people attended the training or what courses they took. Now I'm looking at to see trends of what their interests are, what their skill gaps are, how long they've spent learning on a concept. Then we have also all these innovations that are happening with AI, with talent management. So there's talent intelligent platforms. We're going to be combining those data and we'll have a very accurate picture of what a person's past job has been, what they've taken, what they're interested in, how long it's taking them to learn that. And now L&D can utilize that for real-time data and for needs analysis and to make strategic decisions about training support. So going back to years ago in my career, someone would say, I need this. And you were like, okay, I'll go off and develop that. You were an order taker. Now we're a strategic partner, and that's very exciting. And then the last thing that I would say about that is that organizational learning strategy is going to change. It's going to shift from a learning event culture to a learning performance culture. So it's not going to be, I just attended training. It's how am I learning? How am I growing? And how am I sustaining that? And that is going to allow L&D to see the level of resiliency with employees, their flexibility, and how willing they are to try new things and learn. And talent is, and particularly learning with talent, is going to be a competitive advantage. And AI is going to be a big part of that.
Quite a lot to unpack in that, Maria. So, of course, I think Grammarly, Office 365 are great examples. And I get those Office 365 messages, how much time you have kept for yourself, how much is, they also call it quiet time, or maybe you can call it reflection time, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think there is something in there which we can leverage. And if you start seeing it on an aggregate level, and start slicing and dicing that data. So there has been some talks, and I'm sure there are tools around that which try to analyze just the email communications of employees and figure out what could be the learning requirements or challenges that the business faces as of now. Have you come across anything like that? Anything that kind of, pick up from email conversations that employees have amongst themselves?
Well, I think the thing that's coming out is there's more of an emphasis on the human skills, and obviously COVID accelerated that. But what is going to be interesting for L&D is L&D was typically building out functional skills. I need this, we need to improve this is the product training. I mean, that's where I spent a lot of my career. But now it's going to be more on the people skills and changing culture, changing people. And I really think a lot of organizations are going to expect that even when they have a functional training, there's those people aspects into that. I've learned a product, but can I deliver that information empathetically? Or can I have a lot of emotional intelligence when I'm leading or when I'm working with customers? That's going to be all part of it. So it's not just this very linear process, but it's going to be this whole picture of the 360 process of learning. And that's exciting, but it's going to create challenges because now learning is bigger and we always get that problem of not enough time. So people want something right now. They want it, it's going to take 4 hours to train it and they want it in an hour. So how do you do that? And that's going to be the dance that L&D is going to have to do using the data, using the technology to provide those snippets of talent development and learning.
Yeah. And the underpinning of all that you have been saying is data. More powerful, more granular, more specific data that L&D can get. They can leverage it to rework on the programs or design programs in such a way they could be personalized, they could be more just in time, they could be. So there's a lot of different types of offerings that the L&D can deliver utilizing the data. So the starting point is really the data that AI can possibly generate for L&D.
Yes, definitely. Now, the problem, or the challenges, I should say, not the problem, but the challenges are that many of us haven't had a data background. We don't have maybe the tools to do this robust analysis. So there is going to be a ramp up for L&D to learn how to use this data, how to read this data, interpret it, to see the trends. And that's not typically training or time that people spend on that. When I would do learning projects, needs analysis was about this much time, and it really needs to be bigger because you need to use that data to be more effective. And there's going to need to be some tools in place, whether it's platforms, talent intelligent platforms, learning experience platforms, to be able to take that data and create dashboards and pictures of that data that allows people to see those trends. But certainly there's going to be some business analytics, data analytics ramp up for the L&D groups.
Yeah. So one of the key skills, of course, they will need is working with data as data becomes available. So are you seeing the data being made available just with new age systems? Because there has been learning experience platforms which try to project that there is some amount of AI in some of them at least. Have you seen some of them really delivering the kind of data that you are thinking they should be delivering?
Well, it's still really in its infancy, and a lot of that is because the data isn't great.
Yeah.
And that's, again, another big area that L&D is going to have to drive is we're going to have skill taxonomies that we need to have in place to understand what is the current state of skills and what's the future state. And it's going to be doing skill inventory for a lot of organizations and working with managers to determine what are those future skills that their employees need to have. So there's some great systems out there, but I'm concerned more that the data is not there, that we don't have all that in place. You talk to organizations now, even very sophisticated organizations, and they'll say, well, we have competency models for some groups, but not all of them. And when you look at the competency models, they are the current state. Here's what you need to have in order to be effective in your job right now. It's the future state of those skills and those skills taxonomies. The other thing is that we really need a universal skill taxonomy for learning development. One of the things that I'm working on in my role is to develop a universal taxonomy for distribution logistics professionals. That doesn't actually exist. So when you look at job descriptions, if you look at when someone comes in, it's hard to pinpoint where their skills are. And as we continue to evolve with this fourth industrial revolution, and we have robotics and automation happening, people are going to change jobs. So how do you determine what they have and what they need? And we don't have a good picture of that. And the example I give around the universal taxonomy is, how do you describe management? That term is very ambiguous. And for someone at my level, years of experience, management means something different as opposed to someone who's a Gen X, Gen Z, right? They are seeing things very differently in terms of management. It's more collaborative. There's no hierarchy. It's everyone's a level playing field, where I advanced my career moving up the ladder. So we don't have a really good picture and a definition of what the skills mean. And until we have that, it's going to be hard for systems to use that. The other piece around that we're making progress, I certainly see we've got a lot more, and hats off to my HR colleagues that are in diversity and inclusion, because the data is biased right now. And it's really important that we have an expansive snapshot. So as more and more organizations continue to expand their cultural integrations, they're doing their diversity and inclusion, they're including more people and expanding their skill set, the data is going to be a lot better, because my learning experience, as opposed to someone else who's been in a different country or a different place, totally different. And we're global companies now, global economies, and we've got to think about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, especially about the skills taxonomy that is also, in a way, kind of a moving target, with the you talked about the fourth industrial revolution. Uh, if you look at the perspectives of that, you would see possibly the skills are going to be having smaller shelf lives. So it is some sort of a moving target for L&D in terms of defining the
Mhm.
hierarchies also. So do you see even that is a upskilling challenge for L&D? Because not everybody, at least I don't see a lot of them doing the skills hierarchy very effectively in their organizations. So is that also a big upskilling challenge? And it is kind of an increasing challenge with the skills kind of getting uh, obsolete possibly sooner in times to come.
Yes, the shelf life of skills is getting shorter and shorter. And that's going to be a big focus for L&D to really determine what is the next future skills and what is the bench strength that's required. One of the things that I think is going to be a challenge for organizations right now is that a lot of times we're not doing value added work in L&D. We're providing a job aid or we're developing a workshop. It's not always the best remedy for learning, the best product. And what I'd like to see is L&D is going to be more of this learning experience partner, this workforce partner, a collaborator in learning. And more companies, and I'm already seeing it in my industry with distribution, logistics professionals who are working in the warehouse, they are training themselves. They're doing informal learning. And that's great because they are the experts in their functional expertise. I don't feel like L&D should be involved in that. Where we should be involved is helping develop people in those skill sets that are those soft skills, although we know they're not really soft, they're very critical skills, but having decision-making ability, being a critical thinker, a problem solver, those are the things that L&D needs to be working on and developing and building out that skill set because the shelf life is longer in those. And when I have been talking to our managers that are in our distribution facility members companies, they are telling me that previously they were following policies and procedures. And it's a very procedural process when you get product into a warehouse and when it comes back out. And so now I don't have to explain this too, because everyone knows supply chain after COVID, but how you get your product, how you get your Amazon package is really distribution logistics. And it's a very process-oriented process, but it is the problem is that everything changed with COVID. The rules, their policies, their procedures went out the door. I had many managers from our member companies tell me that if their frontline supervisors and their employees hadn't had the ability to make decisions, problem solve, empower people to change the process from what was previously learned and documented, they wouldn't have been able to succeed in getting the product out the door. So those are the skills that I feel L&D needs to be working on, are those pieces that will continue in people's careers. They're going to be a valuable part of their whole personalized learning, and it makes people more effective. Let the experts that are on the floor train people or bring in that informal learning, and let L&D drive that growth mindset and the cultural pieces. That's where the shelf life is going to be.
Yeah. Some call them power skills these days instead of soft skills.
Yes, absolutely. And they're critical. Even if you are working with robots, which is happening a lot in my industry, you have automation, things break. You need to figure out what's happening. You need to see that this robotic process isn't doing something right. You need those problem solvers. So in my industry, it's co-robotics, and that's really humans working with robots, and that's not going away. So with the fourth industrial revolution, people are talking about, oh, we're going to lose jobs. Yes, there are some jobs that are going to go away, and that's where the reskilling piece comes in. But a majority of people will require upskilling, leveling up their skills to be able to do that next piece in their job, to be at a higher level. They're no longer touching the machinery, but they're analyzing the data that comes out of it and the efficiency of that machinery.
Also thinking is, of course, we're talking about AI and the future of work, the fourth industrial revolution. And my mind is going back to a survey that I recently saw, which was done by a Fosway group in UK, Europe. And so they are, focused on HR and L&D domain. And this was around, how the shift or the pivot has been from non-digital to digital, because of the pandemic. And clearly, a lot of organizations have just shifted from not being so digital to really being digital, almost in a jiffy. But the survey was highlighting that about 60% of the respondents felt that their digital strategy was immature. Now, with the upcoming changes that we're talking of with AI and everything else that comes along with that, are we just seeing a little bit of a big gap that L&D has to really bridge and get ready for what's up in front of us in a few years' time, or maybe now in some industries?
Yeah, the digital literacy gap is huge, and there are organizations working on basically a framework for what people need to have to be more digital literate. For L&D, it really starts with the leadership. The leadership needs to be strategic and thinking about things in terms of digital. So how are you collaborating? How are we delivering things? And that's one of the biggest things is training materials. Are you still printing out stuff? I hope not. Are you storing it in a way that allows it to easily be updated, maintained, shared? That give knowledge management systems, however you collect that. But the bigger piece in that is that with this shift of digital, there's so much already out there for learning content, learning programs. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. What you need to do is figure out how to curate it. So do you have systems in place to allow you to easily pull data or pull programs or pull information that allows employees to get that skill quickly? And can you organize it in a personal learning path that allows people to learn on the job? That is something, there's tools out there, but I don't think people have thought about in terms of their design of their learning programs. It's sort of seen as a whole package. I have to deliver this whole thing, and I can't take disparate pieces out of this. Or if you don't attend this training program that L&D is putting on, you aren't learning. No, that webinar you saw, no, that doesn't count. Or that article you wrote or you read, that doesn't count. So, or you learn, the discussion you had with the water cooler, someone, or via Slack, Teams, that doesn't count. But that's not the case, because we're learning all the time, and we learn best in this collaborative learning environment. And if we don't have a way to collect that and pull that into someone's personal learning record, then we're not going to be successful in this digital environment. L&D is going to be the dinosaurs, because we're still going to be saying you have to attend this whole day training, and it's going to be in this format. And I'm sorry, that doesn't work for you. And that's not going to work. Where I think some interesting technology that I think is successful, it's still in its infancy, but chatbots are really powerful, because there is this interactivity that is happening with employees. Now, there has to be data there has to be scripts, but it's learning in the moment where I can talk to a chatbot and ask a question. So if I can't reach out to my colleague, then I can talk to the chatbot. But L&D has to be in the background curating that and making sure that we have that collection of questions. There also needs to be this experience of taking all this collaborative learning. So creating a forum where people can learn from each other. I took this training, but I don't know how this applies to my job. Who can I work with? The concepts of mentors and peer collaborators, someone to learn from, that's not going away. That's always been there. And it just means that L&D has to make that more accessible for people. So it's part of the overall package. We've had a lot of success in the MHI Industry Leadership Program because we've brought in mentors and we've brought in industry leaders. There are concepts that they learn from experts, but when they get to hear real world stories from a leader, or they get to hear something that happens with a peer and they realize, oh my goodness, my world is the same as yours. We have the same problems. Or they learn something new from a peer, that's true learning. And how do we continue to create those experiences? There's still going to be formal learning. There's things that you have to have this formal process for, but how do you weave in those other pieces? And so the digital piece is going to be huge, because how do we quickly curate that and bring that up to people? And how do we track that? So I have a complete record of everything that I've done.
Yep. And it's a big change in, philosophy of believing that learning is not just happening from training programs or courses that you are creating or making available. Learning is happening almost all the time, from people, from work, from hearing conversations, etc., etc. So bringing all of that into, a framework which can track everything is obviously going to be a huge piece. No, absolutely. But coming back to our AI kind of discussion, what other challenges do you see AI is going to put on L&D going forward?
Well, some of the things I've touched on is really focusing on the right activities and trying to streamline and automate things as much as possible, so that we can do that informal learning, that learning in the moment, utilize the data, quickly pull up things, recall, and then turn around and deliver it or share that. That's going to be key. And that doesn't just lend itself to L&D, that also is true for departments. So learning and development is going to be driving this culture change for learning. It's this growth mindset. And the learning's not going to go away. AI is going to continue and machine learning to be tracking and collecting that data. So people are going to have to be open to learning. And L&D is going to be a big part of that. They're going to have to drive that change. Novartis their chief learning officer has really driven a lot. They have rolled out a whole program of this growth mindset learning culture, because they recognize that their role is not so much training people how to do their job, but how to learn. And then how to use the data that they have to be better employees, to determine where their skill gaps are and what they need to learn, and let them drive that learning growth. They're simply there as the collaborators, the partners, but also driving that culture change. The other thing, we talked about the taxonomies. That's going to be really important. You have to have future state to determine what the current state is, or the current state to determine the future state is, but to also working with managers to be thinking about what's that future employee look like, and also to help them think about what does that continuous learning look like. And then obviously getting literate with that data. So L&D is able to read that data and know what to do with it. How to talk and coach through that is huge. The other thing is that there are going to be more things around AR and VR, because data can be used very effectively with that. Behavioral and verbal data from VR can really help people predict real world training and ability to have difficult conversations. So the AI piece is going to be huge in bringing that in to bring a more realistic picture. And that's where L&D is going to have to ramp up the technology skills too, because it's not going to be doing so much face-to-face facilitation or virtual facilitation or e-learning. It's going to be those immersive learning activities using the data that they've collected to create that real world experience, because the ramp up time is shorter. Employees are going to be expected to jump in and start doing their role. So how do you simulate that in a real world experience as much as possible? And then the last part is that we really need to be able to measure what's happening, and AI is going to be obviously helping out that piece of it, but seeing what's happening. So a lot of times, and there's so many articles and talks about the ROI for training. I mean, it's really hard to measure the effectiveness of training. A lot of the stuff that I do around leadership development, sometimes that's very hard beyond level one. Hey, it was a great program. Well, I learned a couple things. Maybe I moved up. And so L&D is going to have to really focus on having a robust metrics system in place, having a process for data collection, and having a methodology for how they're going to measure and monitor and deliver those results. Because otherwise it's just going to be a bunch of numbers and a bunch of data. And so those are the things that I think that, ramping up your processes, being streamlined, moving away from manual, non-value activities, driving that growth culture for learning and helping others embrace that, and then having metrics and measurements in place so that you can continue to use that data.
Quite a few points there to unpack. I think there are 6 that I listed out. Skills taxonomy, the culture of learning. By the way, Novartis is a great example. I happened to read that book by Simon Brown and his co-authors. They've done a fantastic job at Novartis. Working with data, it's a skill that they need to develop. AR, VR, immersive experience is the way to go in future. Involving managers is one part that you have mentioned within skills taxonomy, but let me put it separately. Maybe I have a question for that. And measurement, which is going to be so crucial in proving the value that L&D provides. The question was really around, how important are managers, apart from the skills taxonomy? Because one of the things that we are experiencing, understanding, and trying to, influence our clients with is that unless we involve line managers, the transfer of learning, opportunities to really apply that, to even observe whether people have learned or not, etc. So that kind of closing the loop may not just be possible. So it seems managers should be one of the most important set of stakeholders in the whole change and training processes that L&D drives, even though they may not be directly doing much, but they had so much of stake in getting this right.
Definitely. They are crucial to this because they're the ones who are coaching their employees to grow their skill set. The other piece is they're going to have access to data, right? They're using AI. How do they use that well? Mm-hmm. How do they evaluate that data and know, okay, this is an employee performance issue, or maybe it's a data error, or maybe there's some other root cause that's happening. We already have heard stories with Amazon has had those issues where they're relying purely on the data, and that doesn't work because there are other factors that go into that. And that's where now the empathy, the compassion, having that emotional intelligence to really look at that and say, is this just a bad week for someone, or is there really a systemic problem? Mm-hmm. There, some of the stories that I've heard, again, within the supply chain and material handling industry that I'm in, but things like product coming in and the packaging was wrong. And so people were slotting it incorrectly, but it was just a slight variation. And it wasn't the performance of the employee, it was that change in that product. Mm-hmm. So a really intuitive manager has to look at that data and say, something's wrong here, and really do that problem solving to figure out, is someone not working efficiently, or are there other factors? And when I worked in telecommunications and supported the contact centers, we always tried to coach people, especially frontline supervisors, don't coach the metrics, don't coach the numbers. Well, of course they did. You're not meeting your numbers. You're not meeting your quota, but there are other ways to help support people to meet their performance. And that's where managers are going to need to be walking around, talking to people, being very collaborative and proactive with their employees to coach them to grow their skills and constantly think about learning. And yes, the numbers are there. The metrics are going to tell us things, but it's not always the complete picture. that, I think that mindset of always developing your people is not something that a lot of managers have. Learning sort of like, well, if we have time, well, you're going to have to make time because people's skill sets are going to be obsolete. Your whole function can be obsolete. So you have to think about constantly developing people. Again, talent's going to be the competitive advantage. And that employee who can constantly grow is a competitive advantage. And managers are directly responsible for that. The other piece, and again, you've seen this with Amazon, is if I am constantly being tracked, my performance, my efficiency, how long I spend on something, where I walk, that creates an incredible sense of anxiety and distrust. So how do managers create this collaboration with the data and the employees to create this trust of we're using these metrics to be more efficient, to do our job better? I'm not tracking every move that you do. And so they're going to have to be able to coach and create that sense of trust. We've already seen that being pushed, right, during COVID, because it was, you're not in the office. Do I trust you? So now we've gotten over that. Okay, people can be efficient. So COVID has changed a lot of things, and some things for the better, because it's created that really that emphasis on being very collaborative, having trust, assuming the best with people, even though you might not see them online. So even if the data doesn't match, and that is what L&D is going to have to change, is that whole mindset for that. And that's going to be difficult, because that it's establishing that credibility to be able to be there and say, this is what you need to do. I know you don't have time. You've got these things going on, but you need to be developing your people. The last thing I'd say about that is that managers will, there's a talent shortage. And so managers are going to come to L&D and be like, say, I'm going to hire this person. They don't have the skills that I was looking for, but I think they've got a good base set. L&D, now you need to get them ramped up. So how do you do that? Well, I mentioned that, informal learning and bringing some of that functional skills back to the actual functional managers is probably the way to do that, but that takes some collaboration. But I do feel like L&D is going to have to really streamline and make sure they're working on value-added activities, because they're going to be called in to basically ramp up people very quickly. They no longer have the skills. So it is also planning ahead for those formal processes and those formal training things like software engineering or data analytics. What are those things that you're going to need? They're going to need some more formal training. Start putting that in place of how you would get people ramped up. We already know that's a skill gap. How do you get those managers on board that it's a collaboration? You look at the skills that person has that they're bringing in, or the person they currently have. What can they take for right now to keep building up their skills? And then how do you sustain that? Because learning is not a one moment situation or one event. And that's what's also changed. It's not, you went to training once, you marked off, I did that training and then it's done. It's continuous. And again, it goes back to that manager. How do you get them on board to coach and embrace that? Constantly developing people, constantly allowing them to grow and being a partner with L&D.
Thank you for sharing that. I think there's so much in there about what we have always been believing, that managers are probably, the last mile of any training delivery or training success. So unless you get them on board and excited about it and take ownership of that, no training program is going to be really successful. One of the jokes that we have been hearing is, okay, you're back from training, but this is how we do things here. So, so you do whatever in your training program, but don't change anything when you're back from there. That's what managers can sometimes say, or they effectively communicate without saying those words if they're not on board. But very critical element that you mentioned was about the human angle of analyzing data, because sometimes data may not be the whole story. So it's the manager's experience and understanding of data and people that becomes so crucial in working with data also. So there is some connect between what L&D would be doing with data and what managers will have to support so that L&D gets the right data and manager themselves use that data in a proper fashion for the furtherance of coaching or mentoring, or how they are progressing with the training application.
Yeah, they need to be ramped up on how to read that data and how to be on board with that. It's, I think, again, it goes back to that learning collaborative partner, right? Where it's going to be a partnership with everything. And that's, to me, what's exciting is that L&D is going to be more strategic. They're going to be more of a partner. Companies know that they need managers on board. They need managers to be efficient. They need managers to be able to use the data and drive the performance of their employees in the company. And the only really group that can do that is L&Ds, to get people on board, to get them trained, to change that culture, to change that mindset. So it's going to be, I think, critical for more, and this was already happening in my experience and in my different roles, but more people on the ground, so to speak, that are partnering with managers. So we're not, previously in my career, I was like in a center of excellence, and we created stuff and then we pushed it out. And there was no partnership. There was no alignment or change management with anything that we did. And you can't be that way. It has to really be this partnership. And I think you might have data review sessions where you're really looking at what's the performance data here, and how does this look at like with your skills, and what are you seeing with the gaps in your team, and really using that for the conversation. Data is a very powerful tool because it's, as we get more expansive with it, it's less biased. It's hard to refute that data. And you can look at that and have conversations. So if L&D is very well versed in how to read that data, how to talk about that data, how to consult on that data, and then that manager understands why that's important, and how to have this both empathetic and culture of trust while looking at that data, then they can work in partnership to continue to build those skills. But the skill gap and the shelf life, again, is going to be so critical. It's not going to just be one group. It's going to be a whole partnership. And I think that there'll be people who will be coming out of different functional areas that might be in L&D, and they're providing their perspective on their area of expertise and how that pertains to learning and growing and the data. So it's going to change the structure of organizations too, and L&D, and how we operate with different functional groups.
Yeah, I think it is only going to increase the interdependency on each other. But yes, as you said, data is probably the best thing to have conversations with. People can't refute it. It becomes unbiased if you interpret it correctly, and you can have more meaningful conversations around data if you are collecting data. Otherwise, it is feelings, and people may not really be very happy with those kind of discussions. Excellent. Excellent. I want to take a quick step back. The very first question you said about people not having enough time for training, and maybe there is an opportunity for AI to support that in a way that it can give very focused interventions, smaller interventions, because it can analyze, or it can work with a lot of information and say, okay, this much is suitable for you. You don't have to go for the whole 4-hour thing. Just 15 minutes is good enough for you today, and maybe make some sort of a sequence of programs for you to be done over a few weeks. So it doesn't hurt so much in terms of time that you have to be away from job, from a manager's perspective, or even from people's perspective sometimes. Do you see that as one of the benefits that AI can possibly deliver to, especially, handling that challenge of, oh, I don't have enough time?
Adaptive learning is going to really increase because we'll have data to know what people knew before and what they need to know. And yes, I think, and that goes back a little bit. I'm going to jump back to what I said about, the structure of training. We really need to think about things as very small chunks so that we can pull that out based on what we already know that people have. So if I'm looking at the data, I see they've already mastered this skills, but they're missing one piece of this. How can I pull that data out? And how can I pull out that information and share it with them? So it's going to change things around how we structure more formalized programs. And that's why you're seeing a lot of micro credentials, because we're looking at smaller snapshots of data. We're not even with looking at the data, we are assuming that people have the skills and that we're building on that. But obviously, when people have this personalized learning record, we already know from the data what they've taken, what their skill set is, what their interests are, then you can deliver that more personalized learning. But it's also that mindset of it's okay if you start right here, not at the beginning, but you jump in at the middle. It's having that the learning materials organized in a way to be able to serve that up. But people are going to expect that. I mean, we already see that right now with people using YouTube or social media. They're just grabbing one snippet of what they need. And yet we go back and we say, we're going to start with an overview and we're going to have this full day of training, or, whatever that program is going to be. We feel like we have to give them all of it. It's, everything in the kitchen sink. And that's not what people are looking for. So yes, definitely adaptive learning. More programs are getting better about that, but they need the data to know where people currently are. And what we're doing right now, right, is we're having people take a test, a pre-test, right, to determine what they are. In the future, we'll already have that information. We'll already know what they mastered. And when I launch into a program, it's already going to tell me, you already mastered these things. So I'm going to serve up this to you. So absolutely, AI, machine learning is going to bring that up and deliver that. And it's going to be up to, again, having those processes in place to be able to adjust to those smaller snippets and give people exactly what they need and not the full package.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Fantastic. So we've already covered a few topics on what possibly L&D needs to do in terms of upskilling themselves. Is there anything else that you would like to advise to L&D to get better prepared for this, how the fourth industrial revolution is going to change their role and their organizations?
Well, I personally, for myself, what I've been working on that I do feel is going to be this trend for L&D is the ability to coach and drive performance. I'm more of a facilitator in the things that I do. I'm not the expert. I'm facilitating the learning. I'm helping people learn from each other. I'm creating that environment of learning. And that's a different mindset. It used to be that L&D was the sage on the stage, or they had talked to all these experts and they gather the data. Now I serve it up. I'm not the expert. I am simply the person who helps you embrace learning, creates that mindset for growth, and then helps connect you to the people who do know, or the people who can create those experiences. So it's really a connector. And that's my role. And everything that I do now is connecting people to other people to learn, whether it's learning from a leader, it's learning from a mentor, learning from a peer. I give a framework for here's the things that I think you should learn, but I'm creating that pathway for who they should go learn that from, because those are the experts. That is the more credibility in that. But I'm coaching people. And then throughout the programs that I do, I'm meeting with people to talk about, how do you synthesize everything that you've learned? And again, it could be, what's the performance data that you're seeing? What are the metrics around that? And how can you use that to continue to learn and grow and improve? That's the piece that's missing. It's that sustainment. It's that having those conversations on what have you learned so far and how can you use that? That's why when you attend training and you go back to the workplace and you think, well, that was great. How can I use it? Well, we're coaching people. How can you use that? And keeping them fresh with what they've learned and how they can truly apply it. Or who do you need to talk to who's had success in that? Those are the pieces and that collaborative relationship that L&D is going to have. And that's going to be different.
Yeah. No, very important actually, for L&D to get their skills right for this upcoming revolution. Not every industry has been really hit by that yet. But yeah, it's coming. So very important. Thank you so much, Maria. I think it was a very insightful conversation. Thank you for sharing all the wisdom that you have gathered. I'm sure our listeners will love it.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. And, if I've shown a lot of passion, I can't help myself because it's an exciting time. I've always been passionate about helping people learn and grow. And when you have more tools to do that, you have more buy-in from the business and you have the ability to be more strategic and have a bigger impact. That's really exciting. So sometimes it's hard to contain my passion around it.
Yeah, no, passion is contagious, and thank you so much for sharing all of this today.
Thank you. It's
Really
a lot of fun.